One of the last storms of winter batters the rugged coasts of Washington and Oregon. It brings with it the life's blood of this region, rain. As the winds rise over the coastal ranges, they drop their rain on the forest below. The deluge begins in autumn and doesn't let up until spring. This abundant moisture fuels the growth of an emerald kingdom. More productive than the tropical rainforest, it's home to the largest and some of the oldest living things on Earth. This is a world of giants, a kingdom of conifers that can reach up to 300 feet. Some tossed their crowns in the canopy before Columbus journeyed to this continent. Redwoods, firs, spruce, and hemlock, they count their lives in centuries. Some can live for 1,000 years. Not all the giants of this world are evergreen. Measuring only 10 inches, banana slugs are still titans of their kind. They're hermaphrodites, and when two meet, they are sure to find a strange kind of romance. Joined in a slimy embrace, they remain entwined for up to 30 hours as they fertilize each other's eggs. They break the embrace by chewing off each other's male organs, making them functionally female until the eggs are laid. The forest floor is a mossy sponge, the ideal home for yet another giant, the Pacific giant salamander, which can reach a foot in length. Deceptively sluggish, it's a major predator in the streams. When it ventures onto the forest floor, even mice may fall prey to its voracious appetite. The Roosevelt elk, the largest subspecies of elk in the world, finds forage abundant in the colonnades of the ancient forest. The Cascade Mountains are well named. Snowmelt swells the streams that tumble from mountain to the sea. Filtered by a living carpet of greenery, the water here is the purest in the world. Behind a glittering veil, the dipper hides its nest. Named for its bobbing dance, its well-oiled feathers prepare it for dipping in earnest. It plunges into the freezing torrent to collect insects and small fish to feed its growing brood. With the spring flood, Chinook salmon find their way home from the sea. Following some well-remembered scent, they fight their way up the mountainsides to the cold, clear streams of their birth. A punishing journey that can last hundreds of miles. The true North American rainforests are found only in the steep western valleys of the Olympic Peninsula. Protected from fire and wind, the trees are huge and widely spaced. A luxuriant mantle of lichen and moss grows on every branch or log, living or dead. The ruffed grouse performs on a downed log to attract a mate, but he attracts some unwanted attention instead. But the low-pitched sound is hard to locate, and the fisher returns to his pursuit of rodents. This large weasel lives a solitary life except in spring when it mates. It's a ferocious hunter and is the only animal to regularly dine on porcupine. The fisher is a creature of the deep forest. It uses down logs as hunting grounds year-round and as nests in the winter. But it's just as at home high above in the treetops. As it climbs, it enters the powerhouse of its world. Millions of needles transform sunlight into living forest, and lichens sift nitrogen, a precious nutrient, from the air. The fisher is just one of 200 animals which make their home in the old-growth forest. But not all the trees here are ancient. From seedlings to standing snags, all ages are represented. The forest constantly regenerates itself. Light spills down to the forest floor, supporting a wondrous diversity of animals and plants. Among them is the Pacific yew, a drooping, spindly tree. It may take a century for its trunk to reach just 6 inches in diameter. But its bark contains Taxol, a powerful new drug in the fight against certain cancers. It takes the bark of 3 100-year-old yew trees to produce enough Taxol to treat only 1 patient for a year. Yews grow in the understory of the ancient forest. But this virgin forest is rapidly disappearing, following a pattern which began centuries ago. At the time Europeans came to America, old-growth forest stretched from the eastern seaboard all the way to the Mississippi. In the first 2 centuries of settlement, these were largely cleared. As an area of forest fell, the timber industry simply moved west. The Pacific Northwest was the last region to come under the axe. Today, only 10% of the original ancient forest here still stands. By the 1920s, timber companies bought up the most productive forests. What was left over was placed in trust in our national forests or under the care of the Bureau of Land Management. The private lands were the first to be cut. It took 2 axe-wielding men a whole day to cut down a single tree. With the advent of cross saws, the team's output was increased tenfold. It was backbreaking, dangerous work, but the men who did it were strong and highly skilled and proud of it. They were providing the wood that helped build a nation and the paper on which its dreams would be written. Today's loggers keep the old traditions alive, even though many of these skills are no longer needed in modern mechanized forestry. But the pride and the spirit of the early pioneers is alive and well at the Albany Timber Festival in Oregon. Even today, much of the actual cutting is done by small family-run outfits, independent contractors who work alone or for the big timber companies. And the skill needed to fell a towering 200-foot giant hasn't changed either. The angle of the cut must be just right so that the tree won't get hung up on any other trees or shatter on impact. Only the most skilled and experienced sawyers can fell an ancient giant in minutes. Almost all the ancient forest that remains is on federal land, most of it in national forests. It comes as a surprise to many Americans that logging has always been allowed in our national forests. The Forest Service has a dual mandate: to preserve local logging communities and to protect wild things as well. Half the wildlife habitat in the United States is in our national forests. As the trees fall, so do the numbers of forest creatures. Some animals, like the cougar, can thrive outside the ancient forest. The spotted owl cannot. While the cougar adapts to the changing landscape, the spotted owl is threatened with extinction. The owls are barometers of the forest's health. Where they flourish, the essential character of the old-growth ecosystem still survives, preserving the genetic treasures of countless millennia of evolution. A Steller's jay raises a golden cloud of pollen. But there are no flowers because conifers evolved long before flowering plants. The wind carries the pollen from the tiny male cones to the larger female cones. The sticky pollen clings to spider webs and rains down to carpet the forest floor. A rare delicacy for a tailed frog tadpole. Its sucker mouth anchors it in the rushing torrent. It inches to the water's edge to graze on pollen, a welcome change from a diet of algae. black bear licks up the pollen, but her cubs have fun, not food, on their minds. In the upper reaches of the stream, the Chinook salmon have finally reached their gravel spawning beds. But this hard-fought opportunity to mate does not go unnoticed. Salmon eggs are a nutritious meal for the dipper, but relatively few will be eaten. Salmon make the ultimate sacrifice for the next generation. Their purpose fulfilled, death is all that awaits them. The dipper's transparent eyelids act as a diver's mask, allowing it to see clearly underwater. It even flies underwater, at ease in the powerful rush. The rufous hummingbird must feed constantly to fuel its high-energy life in this cool mountain climate. This female must work even harder to feed her newly fledged young. The male does not help raise the brood, but puts his energy into territorial defense instead. Rays of sunlight glint off its throat feathers, a flashing message that a male is in residence. The spring flood could easily wash the salmon eggs away. But downed logs create quiet pools where the young salmon develop in peace. The logs catch clean gravel, which protects the tiny embryos. They breathe through the membrane of their eggs. Already, the eye spot and heart can be seen. But in many streams, the waters have been muddied, and the reason is not hard to find. Clear cuts. Clear cutting is the most economical method of logging, yet it strips away the plants that hold the soil on the mountain slopes. In the heavy rains of the Northwest, thousands of miles of dirt logging roads become sluices of runoff. The soil simply washes away. Where streams from virgin and cut forest meet, the difference is easy to see. On steep slopes, whole mountainsides may give way. Landslides are as much as 10 times more frequent in clear cuts than in the forest. Eventually, the soil finds its way into the streams. The ominous clouds of silt have dire consequences for aquatic life. The young fish literally suffocate. Many salmon runs in the Northwest are near collapse due to logging and damming. But in the remaining virgin forest, the salmon eggs are washed by clear, oxygenated water. Secure in their gravel beds, they begin to hatch. Tiny fry, called alevins, absorb their yolk sacs through a tracery of capillaries. Their first challenge is to fight their way to the sunlight. As they grow, they leave the sheltered pools behind, maturing in larger, fast-flowing streams. Year-old salmon, called parr, are ready to begin their migration to the sea. There they will spend up to 8 years before returning to the stream of their birth. Downed logs are vital to the ancient forest. It may take 5 centuries for one of these forest titans to decompose, and all that time it nurtures new life, providing food and shelter for legions of creatures. A red-backed vole finds an ideal nesting chamber inside a rotting log. Here, protected from temperature extremes and predators, the young voles enjoy an afternoon snack. When they're grown, they'll feed almost exclusively on truffles, pungent and delicious underground fungi coveted by humans as well. Truffles flourish in the ancient forest. The mother leaves the security of the nest log to dig up her next gourmet meal and ends up on the menu instead. Fungi-eating rodents are favorite prey of the spotted owl. It uses large standing snags or dead trees for its nest. The fisher also uses hollow logs to shelter its young, but that won't be till winter. To find enough rodents to feed its brood, each pair of owls hunts over a huge territory of old growth, as much as 9,000 acres. And the multi-layered canopy shields the owlets from predation by larger birds of prey. The fisher's hind legs rotate 180 degrees, making it a consummate climber. Since it shuns open logged areas, it too has become very rare. Even on the forest floor, it often keeps to the trees, using the fallen giants as walkways. Bittersweet huckleberries, a treat too good to ignore. The pileated woodpecker, the largest woodpecker in North America, is also dependent on dead and dying trees for its survival. As the ancient forests have dwindled, so has its range. Oblong excavations are signs of its search for carpenter ants and termites. The Pacific dampwood termite invades all dead or dying trees, but it must wait until fungi have prepared them properly. The fungi then give off chemicals that attract the termites to the trees. Major decomposers, they digest the wood, making its nutrients available for new growth. Looking very punk, the pileated chicks begged loudly for a taste of termite. A duplex nest hole allows both parents to feed the chicks at the same time. Pileated woodpeckers use large standing snags in old growth for their nest holes. The chicks are safe and secure 100 feet above the forest floor. "100 feet above them, a Douglas squirrel or chicory is busy harvesting fir cones. It snips off the ripe cones. Later, it will collect them and stash them away for the winter. Some are eaten on the spot, but enough stray seeds escape to begin the life cycle of the giant trees anew. Old logs support more life than they ever did when alive. These nurse logs are wonderful seed beds for certain conifers. Seedlings can take root here without competing with the plants that crowd the forest floor. In summer, when virtually no rain falls, the logs retain moisture and can actually manufacture water by decomposing. Centuries later, buttress roots still hold their nurse in a wooden embrace. Within the nurse log, the seedling meets a lifelong partner. A thread-like fungus merges with the seedling's roots. It protects the tree from disease and helps it absorb water and nutrients. In return, the fungus feeds on sugar produced by the tree. Without this partnership, the giant trees could not survive. Tree ears and mushrooms are the only visible evidence of the most diverse fungal network in the world. The egg-like packets of spores in the bird's nest fungus await a shower to wash them from their cup. Rain and wind spread many kinds of spores, but some fungi have unsuspecting allies. The flying squirrel is one. It too eats truffles. They're a kind of underground mushroom packed with spores. Truffles attract squirrels with their strong scent, but the squirrel must always keep an eye out for the spotted owl. It's safe within its nest hole, an abandoned woodpecker nest. The squirrel spreads the truffle spores in its droppings. Dawn, deep in the summer drought, the warmest time of year, and there has been no rain for months. But on the wind, help arrives. With the fog blown in from the sea comes life-giving moisture. The mist condenses on each one of the tree's 66 million needles. Each drop of dew adds up, a cool drink just when the forest needs it most. When an old snag finally falls, it creates a gap in the canopy that encourages young trees to grow. A family of coyotes tumbles from its den. When wolves still ran here, coyotes could not compete and were rare. But since wolves were hunted out, the versatile coyote has moved happily into the forests. Holes and stumps are valuable property. They're ideal dens for black bears, bobcats, and coyotes. As the sun climbs and the heat builds, the mother's temper runs short. The summer drought sets the stage for change. It is not mist which veils the forest this time. It's smoke. Fire is the major force of change in the forest. A fire destroys many trees, but some of the thick-barked giants survive. Biological legacies that retain the qualities of old growth for the next generation. But this fire is different. It falls from the sky. The debris left behind by clear-cutting is set ablaze by the Forest Service with napalm. Slash burning clears the land and leaves behind nutrient-rich ash for the seedlings the Forest Service will plant. Some wildlife will flourish here for a while, but creatures dependent on old growth may never return. The unnatural edge of the clear-cut causes more damage. Trees at the edge cannot bear the force of wind. With the first severe storm, they snap like kindling or are blown over. The patchwork pattern of clear cuts compounds the damage. Desiccating wind and sunlight invade the forest's new edges, extending the effects of the clear cut beyond its borders. But a wind of change is stirring in the forest. The Forest Service is experimenting with methods developed through their own research, which they hope will be the basis of a more sustainable forestry. Helicopters are used to lift logs so that logging roads, which cause erosion and landslides, can be kept to a minimum. And instead of clear cutting, the service is testing partial cutting. They hope this might reproduce the thinning effect of a natural fire. They are searching for ways to sustain the diversity and productivity of the forest. Downed logs can be left behind as habitat for wildlife. And logs can be lifted out instead of dragged to protect fragile forest soils. But with a budget geared to timber sales and political pressure to keep cutting, the Forest Service often finds itself unable to both uphold environmental laws and still get the cut out. Left to its own devices, the forest does have amazing recuperative powers. Fire forms meadows where the first things to grow back are the wildflowers. Wild irises are the key to the bizarre life cycle of the iris fly. Once her eggs are fertilized, the female enters the shadowy recesses of the forest. There she lays her eggs and abandons them to their fates. But her young need the unwitting help of another creature to survive. A trapdoor spider, the intended victim of the newly hatched fly larva. Slowly, the tiny larva climbs a pine needle and waits. Somehow, the larva recognizes its host and reaches out. Carefully, it climbs the spider's leg and burrows into the body through the soft leg joint. Once inside, the fly will continue to grow, eating the spider from the inside out. In a year's time, it will emerge as an adult. The spider is doomed. In the fire meadows, the Roosevelt elk gather for the rut. Wreathed by mist and ivy, this bull watches over a herd of females, testing their readiness to mate. Potential competitors are chased away. With fall, the rains return. Just when the broadleaf trees lose their leaves, the conifers have a burst of growth. Winter swaddles the mountains in snow, but conifers shed enough snow to expose their needles to sunlight. 2/3 of their growth occurs outside the growing season of flowering plants, which is why conifers dominate this landscape. The spring melt unlocks the frozen assets of winter. Rising stream levels smooth out the rapids, inviting sockeye salmon to return from the sea. Bright in their breeding colors, the males developed hooked beaks to fight for females. Today, some sockeye runs are considered endangered, victims of hydroelectric dams and the effects of logging. Fishing is prohibited, but there are fishermen above the law. This young black bear experiments with several fishing techniques. But none of them is very effective. Once the salmon spawn, they die. And the bear is only too happy to scavenge what it could not catch. Before they make their runs, the salmon gather where the rivers meet the sea. There, another giant feasts among the schools. Orcas, or killer whales, depend upon the salmon, which in turn depend upon the forest of giants that once cloaked these shores. Years ago, no one saw the forest for the trees. Big trees meant big timber, and that meant big business. The rushing rivers were treacherous highways to the mills. Timber companies bought and logged the bottomlands where the trees were biggest and the rivers were close. Providing wood and paper to a growing nation was a dangerous and heroic job. In those days, no one thought of replanting, and the trees fell faster than they could grow back. At first, the timber industry lobbied against cutting in the national forests to keep prices high. But when their own forests were exhausted, they turned to the federal lands to keep the flow of logs coming. In the 1960s, large-scale cutting began in the national forests. In the last decade, the ancient forest has fallen faster than ever before. But even so, the number of timber-related jobs has been dropping. With less forest left to cut, there are less jobs. Automation has replaced more than half of those thrown out of work. And by exporting logs, we are also losing jobs. The Japanese pay top dollar for unfinished logs, easily outbidding local lumber mills. Starved for raw material, the mills close. The loggers and millers of the Northwest are struggling to survive. As they watch their way of life threatened by forces beyond their control, their frustration has turned upon a strange target. The spotted owl, the unwitting pawn at the center of the battle to save what remains of the ancient forest. In 1973, Congress passed the Endangered Species Act. The law protects species, not forests. But spotted owls need so much old growth to survive that saving the owl could mean saving the forest itself. So much depends upon this ancient forest: water quality, salmon runs, the Pacific yew, even the recreation and tourist industries with an economic value estimated to be 9 times that of timber. Almost 7 million acres of forest have been set aside to save the spotted owl. Hopefully, the whole complex web of life around the owl can also hang on. An entire valley of ancient forest, all the more precious because it's one of the last. Jobs will be lost if the owl and its forest are protected. Whole logging communities are in jeopardy and deserve the nation's help. But the overall decline in timber jobs will not be reversed by logging the last of the old growth. Can we afford to preserve this natural heritage? Can we afford to lose it?
Nature is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you. Siemens, a whole new world of ideas in electronics and electrical engineering. Siemens, precision thinking. And by Canon, quality and innovation for the way we work and live. Canon. And by the gas industry, helping provide cleaner air with clean gas energy.
This is PBS.
Dolphins from the Nature series is available on home video cassette. This program is the most up-to-date exploration of the human perception of dolphins. You may order Dolphins on VHS video cassette for $19.95 plus $3.50 shipping and handling. For credit card orders, please call 1-800-345-WNET or write to the address on your screen. The local presentation of Nature was made possible by the Liz Claiborne Foundation.
Next time on Frontline, 3 years after China's brutal crackdown on the student democracy movement, Frontline examines a country torn by the conflicting realities of economic reform and political repression.
In a nutshell, the leadership of the Communist Party can't be questioned.
Nobody is